1939, it was permitted under life-threatening circumstances for the mother. And then I think in the 1960s, maybe 1967, it was further legalized. So I don't know when this was, and I can't seem to find out. Anscombe's
clinics, it was just to preserve the life of the mother. Or, I mean, she probably wouldn't have any place to protest. It's probably the 67.
It's probably the 67 one.
I mean, it just would have been such a rare event otherwise.
But this picture, and she's here with a priest, but she's not, that I know of, protesting anything. That's right. So, right, she's probably not. Yeah. Anscombe's most important work and contribution to analytical philosophy was the book Intention. This is a guide to intention. So Intention is only 100 pages long, but it's really quite complicated philosophically and analytically. So this is a guy, John Schwenkler's Oxford Guide to Philosophy. It's his attempt to help you understand it. The aim of the book was to make plain the character of human action and will. Rather than attempt to define intentions in abstract from actions, she begins with the concept of an intentional action. And this is the famous pumper. I can get that to work. Sorry, it's still not working.
You're pointing at the wall, not at the screen.
Okay.
So,
There it is.
he did it.
Okay, thank you. The well pumper case. Imagine a man performing a single action. He's moving a water pump up and down with his arm. So she wants you to just think about this action. So he could be pumping in poisonous water, and he knows it's poisonous, to poison a house full of murderous Nazis. And in doing that, he might be saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of Jews, right? But so these are his intentions, maybe. But we don't consider contracting muscles in his arm to pump an intention. It's something your body just does. Or tapping out a certain rhythm with the handle, like trying to make music while he's pumping. We don't consider that a real intention either, because maybe there's a rhythm to it, maybe there isn't. But that has nothing to do with why he's doing the action. If you ask the question why, what is he trying to accomplish? You know, and she encouraged us to think about not in the abstract, but think about everything we do when we perform an action, which I tried that, it drives you crazy. You know, I'm going down to pour myself a cup of tea. Why? Because I do that every morning, because I feel that I need my tea to get going, because I want to hydrate my body. Is it because I, want to infuriate Austin because he has coffee, I have tea? And start thinking all these things.
We'll go with that one.
Yeah, we'll go with that one, right? Knowing me, you would go with that one. So when you think about performing an action, you have an intention that goes along with it. And our intentions are either, if they are the kind of thing where we're thinking ahead, not just hydrating myself, is it virtuous or is it not? And with Truman, she thought it was not virtuous. He may have wanted to end the war, but because he wanted to end the war only with an unconditional surrender, he was willing and maybe eager, but she doesn't say that, to sacrifice many civilians, innocent civilians. So she made contributions to ethics as well as metaphysics. She's credited with having coined the term consequentialism. The Anscombe Bioethics Center in Oxford is named after her, and the center conducts bioethical research in the Catholic tradition. I don't know exactly what that means.
According to Nathan Allen, quote, on her own, Anscombe made waves in philosophy. She's often cited as kickstarting a return to the ethics of ancient Greece. In her paper, Modern Moral Philosophy, she argues that the present theories of morality, Kantian ethics, utilitarianism, and social contract theory, are foundationally bankrupt. She single-handedly carved out space for virtue ethics to be taken seriously as an alternative to other defunct theories. Virtue ethics is defined as a philosophical approach that urges people to live a moral life by cultivating virtuous habits.
So her problem with Harry Truman.
Once Anscombe received word that the Vice Chancellor of Oxford wanted to present former President Harry S. Truman with an honorary degree on peace in June of 1956, she immediately sought to fight this. She gave a speech before all her colleagues, hoping to convince them that following this degree was a mistake. She also published a pamphlet detailing her dissent. And it's debatable whether she convinced one other person who sort of pulled back at the last minute to go along with her in her opinion. So she says in the pamphlet, when I say that to choose to kill the innocent as a means to one's ends is murder, I'm saying that what would generally be accepted is correct, but I shall be asked for my definition of the innocent. I'll give it, but later. Here it's not necessary, for with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we are not confronted with a borderline case. In the bombing of these cities, it was certainly decided to kill the innocent as a means to an end. And a very large number of them, all at once, without warning, without the interstices of escape or the chance to take shelter, which existed even in the, quote, area bombings of the German cities. And this made me think about, when you open the papers, what you read about today on different sides. She also did condemn the area bombings of the German cities, but less vehemently than she condemned Truman for his decision. She went on to say, I have long been puzzled by the common cant about President Truman's courage in making this decision. Of course, I know you can be cowardly without having a reason to think you're in danger, but how can you be courageous? Light has come to me lately. The term is an acknowledgement of the truth. Mr. Truman was brave because, and only because, what he did was so bad. But I think the judgment is sound. Given the right circumstances, for example, that no one whose opinions matters will disapprove, a quite mediocre person can do spectacularly wicked things without thereby becoming impressive. I thought of people that I know of today that in the public eye. When one of her colleagues stated that she was out of line to suggest that Truman was to be held solely responsible for the bombings of Japan, she replied, Mr. Truman did not make the bombs by himself and decide to drop them without consulting anybody. No, he was only responsible for the decision. In defending her position, Anscombe tells us that in the case of Mr. Truman's actions, his direct thought was that killing innocent people is the spectacle needed to end the war. 2 cities, not 1. And I listened to the podcast that my son had listened to. Then I listened to another podcast put out by BBC by a group of women that do this book club thing. And they reiterated that, that claim that it needed to be shock and awe, which I think was a term that W. Bush used, right? Yeah. The bombs were not a threat. The bombs were not dropped in an uninhabited area. The bombs were used as weapons that killed 225 people, harming others with later effects. And within 5 years, the official number rose to 340. I said the wrong number, 340,000. I said 200. 25,000 and it had jumped to 340,000. She said the honorary degree that Oxford was to give to him was a form of sycophancy, which, you know, this bowing and scraping before a famous person so that you'll get kudos from them. So she really came down on Oxford for doing this. Anscombe.
Almost no one agreed with it.
Pardon?
And almost no one agreed.
And almost no one agreed, at least was willing to sign the dissent paper. She had a person that personally, supposedly agreed with her.
Well, one person.
Yeah, right. Out of, I don't know how many.
History forward, not backward. I mean, because already by then, the H-bomb existed.
Right, so, but she went to.
Existed makes all of the previous history look different.
Right. And, I mean, she said, what, and that's part of what she's objecting to. Once a country has it, there's this psychological difference of feeling. She didn't like the fixation on Japan's unconditional surrender, because she said we already had the country where it hurt, and it was, you could argue, we'll never know, but you could argue it was going to happen. So why do this? But and
you have
in
to argue that Truman knew when they were going to surrender,
and
if he didn't drop them.
and
He didn't know that.
and why were Hiroshima and Nagasaki chosen? There is evidently something in the record meeting with all the generals that indicate that if you drop it on Tokyo, which had already been bombed, you won't have the precise record of exactly how much damage can be done to humanity by the atom bomb. If you drop on a place that has never been bombed, you get to do a better head count, which is really astounding. Yeah, oh, right, the scientific method, I guess. Anscombe was worried about the future.
Slide advance.
No, I'm pointing it right at there.
Yeah, he's
Oh, okay. So she was worried about,
Quote, weapons are now manufactured whose sole point is to be used in the massacre of cities. But the people responsible are not murderers because they have these weapons. They have them because they are murderous. I thought of the AK-47, you know, as a little example of one person can do much more damage, I think, with an AK-47 than with a pistol or rifle that shoots one bullet at a time. Deprived of atomic bombs, they would commit massacre by means of their bombs. So I thought, okay, let's go back and look at other sources like Amnesty International, like the UN Special Commission on Warfare, and see what happened during the 30s and 40s. So this is what I found, and I think it's reliable.
In the 1930s, both the United States and Britain refrained from targeting civilians in wartime bombings, regarding such actions as savage and ruthless. Indeed, before the war began, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain made a parliamentary speech declaring it was, quote, against international law to bomb civilians as such and to make deliberate attacks on the civilian population, end quote. The American State Department made a similar statement in 1937, condemning the Japanese bombing of Chinese cities. Quote, any general bombing of an extensive area wherein there resides a large population engaged in peaceful pursuits is unwarranted and contrary to the principles of law and humanity. President Franklin Roosevelt spoke to the issue as well, calling the civilian bombing inhuman barbarism. But we have selective memory because, did I do that or did you do it? I can't tell. So, but the onset of World War II began the transition away from these earlier beliefs. The movement was first initiated by Winston Churchill and the British government in response to Germany's dropping of bombs on London. It was at this point when Churchill articulated the need for, quote, absolutely devastating, exterminating attack by very heavy bombers from this country upon the Nazi homeland. Also pushing Britain toward this change of policy was the fact that military officials began to realize the bombs being dropped from aircrafts were not accurate enough to destroy specific targets, that is, bases and factories, and thus a more effective use of these bombs would be able to direct them at cities where their destruction would have more severe effects. Oh, whoops. Oh. Well, I'm there. Thus, in 1942, under the command of Sir Arthur Bomber Harris, nickname, the Royal Air Force shifted its focus toward destroying, quote, the morale of the enemy civil population. This is very different from just going for the military bases. In the summer of 1942, the United States Air Force joined the strategic bombing campaign of Britain.
Well, that's an anachronism. The United States Air Corps. There was no Air Force in 1942. But
Is that okay?
That's
Okay.
I mean,
I didn't know that. Okay, good.
there was no. There was the Air Corps of the U.S. Army. But that just makes me a little suspicious of how careful the force was.
While
Anyway.
the U.S. had tried to avoid bombing civilian populations, this was another thing that happened. Daytime precision bombing had become a costly liability. This means not just planes, but in lives, because German day fighters were able to detect and destroy many American fighter planes. So under the new policy of strategic bombing, so going for cities instead of going for the other, Great Britain and the United States Command dropped thousands of firebombs on the cities of Cologne, Hamburg, and Dresden, incurring huge casualties. So this is a shift in our
So implicit in
wartime
this,
philosophy.
is that they couldn't precision bomb or attempt to bomb factories at nighttime because they couldn't see them.
I guess.
Yeah,
Sight.
I guess.
no GPS back then.
Exactly. And if you did it during the daytime, you would lose your bomber, your fight.
But now with AI, I don't think we have that problem.
AI isn't the issue, GPS.
Yeah.
But anyway, the thing is though, saying, oh, something changed in 1942. I mean, when Sherman destroyed Atlanta and did his march to the sea, when Sheridan wiped out the Shenandoah Valley, that started a long time before. It started in the American Civil War, at least, where, it's like we have to destroy the adversary's ability to make war.
Yes, but it wasn't unpredictable or indiscriminate attacking the civilian population per se.
Burning down the entire city of Atlanta was pretty blanket.
But implicit in that was that they weren't there to kill the entire population.
My
And
mother-in-law's house got
speaking
blown
of
twice
that, I
by
was
the United
listening to
States.
an NPR show yesterday. They were talking about the origin of the word genocide, and then it wasn't used. I don't even know if it had been created until the 1940s. And this agenda to completely debilitate and destroy an entire population of people, whether it's a country or an ethnic group.
It's thousands of years old. I mean, it's been around
Even
since
though
time began.
we know, if you read history, it's just,
I mean, how about in America? There was a time when people said that. So this is not as novel. This is not as 1940s as this implies.
This is an interesting Pew Center poll taken at different times. And I thought it was interesting that right after the war, and I'm sure my father included, and my mother included, that in 1945, 85% of Americans approved of dropping the bombs using atomic bombs on Japanese cities. That's how it was phrased, not the two cities, but using on Japanese cities. But in 2005, 57% approved. Now, a lot of those people are no longer with us, you know, but there was more detail on this, but I didn't want to do like 82,000 slides, indicating that the younger you are in this 2005, the more likely you are not to have approved of what happened. Now, you know, you could say on one side, they don't remember how horrible it was, but, and then, so one word was approved. Do you approve of the use of atomic bombs? Another word was justify. So that changed the numbers a little bit. And also the dates are different. 1991, 63% said we were justified, whatever that means. And in 2015, 56%. So pretty close to the earlier year. And I think no surprise, except that some people did think it was okay that people living in Japan asked, 29% in 1991 said justified, and only 14% by 2015. So I thought these were, you know, statistically interesting.
Well, but it also shows people don't understand history. I mean, it's easy to look back at things that happened 1,000 years ago and say those were evil people. Spare the rod and spoil the child.
You don't.
If you don't hit your child with a stick, you're a bad parent. Now we put people in jail for that, but it's in the Bible. So, I mean, it's easy to, morality is getting better in the history of the world.
But,
And so
yeah,
if we evaluate people in the past, Pickett's charge was absolute murder.
and there's
We
no,
now know.
there's no way to know unless I could do one of those straw polls where it's, you know, take out your cell phone and it's absolutely anonymous. Which do you think, would you say, I approve of it, I think it was justified, yes, no? I bet we'd get different answers in this room, as long as, you know, as long as people felt comfortable about it.
But Harry Truman was elected by that American electorate that 85% approved of what he did. How many things does a president do that 85% of the people agree with? People have argued that if they found out that, you know, the war went on for another year or two or whatever, and then they found out that he had weapons that could have ended the war in summer 1945, that he would have been impeached.
So, how many people have seen Oppenheimer, the movie? Do you remember a time when, did they have the scene, because Truman evidently did say about Oppenheimer that he was just a crybaby.
Yeah.
And he said, you don't need to worry about that. I've got that on my back, or I've got that on my conscience. He did say that.
Well, I just correct one thing that Bill said. Harry Truman was not elected by the president, by the population at the time of the violence. He
He was only in office for 4 months.
He was elected to be president in 1948.
Yeah, but he
All right, Marilyn, let Marilyn talk.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you for that correction. All right. You stand corrected, but good, okay. So, going forward, United Nations findings, October 17, 2023. So they're trying to figure out how this is all gonna work so that we don't blow each other to smithereens. Disarmament is not a lofty ideal, but a practical imperative. The first committee, Disarmament and International Security, heard today as it concluded its thematic debate on nuclear weapons and began debating other mass destruction weapons. Nuclear weapons, the most inhumane and indiscriminate, these are terms, descriptive terms used by the UN First Committee. So inhumane, indiscriminate, ever created, remain a constant specter of destruction. Namibia's representative warned. Their sheer existence, capable of unimaginable harm to humanity and the planet, creates a temptation and a risk to use. That was one of Anscombe's points. You have it at your beck and call. You just can't help but feel a little bit different if somebody sort of pushes back against you. You know, don't mess with me. I got this. Decisions made today will impact the planet left to future generations, she cautioned. That's the Namibian person on the committee.
The Vatican, too, document prominently condemned Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saying any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities or extensive areas along with their population is a crime against God and man himself, man or woman, himself or herself, and merits unequivocal and unhesitating condemnation. Truman's diary entry states, the target will be a purely military one. The truth was, neither city was a military target, and Truman, as well as his generals, knew this at the time that they said, these are the two cities that we want. Elizabeth Anscombe didn't attend the ceremony, no surprise, in which Harry Truman received the honorary Oxford degree. And it wasn't until 1985, 40 years later, that according to Rufus Miles, Jr., former senior fellow of the Woodrow Wilson School, Princeton University, and former 30-year career official at the US government, that the secret files necessary to examine the A-bombing of the two Japanese wars, the two Japanese cities, were available for us to look at. It wasn't until then that the myth of huge numbers of American, British, and Japanese lives saved had already achieved the status of accepted history. It was in the history books that I read from, that you read from. If people cared to examine the declassified documents, they would have been forced to conclude that the number of American deaths prevented by the two bombs would have been not have exceeded 20,000 and might have been much closer to zero. But we didn't know that until 1985.
We still don't know that.
Well, according to Rufus, and there's a huge document by Rufus Miles, but it's in JSTOR, and I read the first page, but to open the rest of it, I couldn't. If people had cared to examine these documents, yeah, I said that. In an article of 2022, Why the Atomic Bombing of Hiroshima Would Be Illegal Today, in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. So this was the title of their paper, Why the Atomic Bombing of Hiroshima Would Be Illegal Today. The authors, atomic scientists, expose the myths about Hiroshima. One, that we would avoid killing of civilians. And two, the second myth was from commentators who continue to claim that Hiroshima bombing was the lesser evil. The myth relies on a flawed assumption that unconditional surrender was the only acceptable outcome. Those who perpetuate this myth forget that the United States decision makers in 1945 considered other ways of ending the war with Japan, weighing the lives lost from the atomic bombings against the potential lives lost in an American invasion of Japan ignores the possibility that the war could end with neither an invasion nor nuclear attacks. Yes.
Did we give the Japanese leadership choice after our first bombing?
Yes.
So whose fault is it that the people in the second bombing got killed? Was Japanese leadership? Because they could have ended the war before we had to do that.
I see what you're saying. And we heard nothing. That's right. That's what I read. Is that right? We dropped the Hiroshima bomb.
And I mean, they preemptively said, before Hiroshima, they said, we will rain down,
Terror.
that you have never seen before, quit now.
But that said,
And
there was nothing that required us to drop the bomb directly on another city. We could have done it on the Japanese countryside to demonstrate we have more of these bombs, we're willing to drop them.
Mount Fuji, right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where, choose a different, or right off the coast of Japan.
Right.
There's a mini-
Just in case you're wondering, this was not a one-off, we have more.
But historically, dropping it on a city didn't cause them to surrender.
Right, right.
And by the way, there were only 3 bombs on the planet. The first one was at Alamogordo, the second one was Hiroshima, the third one was Nagasaki. We had no more. So it was a bluff. It was a bluff.
So-
Part of the reason they dropped them, a week later is like, the implication was, and then next week and next week and next
And it
week.
was-
Wasn't true.
Was one whole week later, was it?
It was like
Okay, something
week
like
later.
that.
But the thing is, the bluff worked.
Right,
The bluff worked.
interesting.
So they
The first one didn't
they
work.
had justified.
But I would-
The
yeah.
bluff worked.
So, according to an article by McKinney, Sagan, and Wiener, the international law of armed conflict has evolved considerably since 1945. And an attack against, for instance, Hiroshima would be illegal today. It would violate 3 requirements of the law of armed conflict by the Geneva Convention. However, there's no guarantee that a US president would abide by the law. Quote, in a future crisis, it is not difficult to imagine grim scenarios in which there could be great pressure to use nuclear weapons. Public opinion would not necessarily act as a constraint. Polling suggests that most Americans do not believe in a nuclear taboo. This underscores, and this is according to these 3 writers, this underscores the importance of electing presidents who care about law and justice in war. Austin.
You said, voters not. The news is that the election is using nukes.
I said, according to this article by McKinney, Sagan, and Wiener, yes. It says it is not difficult because public opinion would not necessarily act as a constraint. This is a quote from that article. Polling suggests, so they did a poll. Polling suggests that most Americans do not believe in a nuclear taboo. Now, I don't know what question was asked. It could have been, do you believe in nuclear power used positively? I mean, that's different than. I can't, well, but I think I could have answered that with a yes if it had been, trying to, using solar, using nuclear, being very careful versus blowing a city up. But we don't, I think they must have been asked, hopefully.
The majority of Americans might be okay to use the bomb. That's
Really dumb people.
Yeah, well, Rich,
to what extent this whole idea of mutually assured destruction between the Soviets and the United States, we have our feelings about that. We would reduce the likelihood of people wanting to say, oh yeah, we should be using the bomb.
if the idea of mutually induced destruction of both big powers encourages people.
In the 1970s, probably, I guess it was by that time. I would imagine most Americans would not say, let's be very careful if we ever use a bomb, because if we use one against those guys, there's going to be another one in the air before ours can even land.
And I would think even people our age would vote that way. I would think, but I don't know. Mary.
I know very little about this whole historical time period with Japan, but how did they sell this whole concept of, I mean, I guess the American public did not know that we were going to go in and bomb these cities, but how was it that they kind of sold it to us? It was just that this will keep them from bombing us? Is that what they said?
My father was in the Navy in the Pacific. And I once asked him, do you think it's really okay to do that? He said, well, you wouldn't be here. I'd have been dead. They said 550,000 American soldiers would die in taking Japan. That's, they resisted to the last thing. And then another 1 million Japanese so far would probably have been killed. So he was all in favor of it. But, that's a utilitarian argument, which is
My dad
morally bankrupt.
My dad called them those, and he was not a racist person before the war. He never said anything about anybody that would differentiate them, and he just, the war did mess with his life after that. He was never the same. Saw his friends blown up in a foxhole, but Yeah, I mean, the Truman Library online is a fascinating source because all of these things that were secret documents you can now read. So that gave me a little inclination. And if you look at some of the headlines that we had in our papers, they were so incredibly racist. They were including illustrations that were just, obscene stereotypes of faces that, yeah, but Hamas and Israel have both been accused of breaking international law during their latest conflict. The United Nations says it's collecting evidence right now of war crimes by both sides. But enforcing the law amid the fog of war is difficult. Holding perpetrators to account once conflicts are over has proved elusive. The United Nations Charter prohibits aggressive wars, but allows countries the right to self-defense. And we were bombed on Pearl Harbor, so civilians, the wounded, and prisoners must be treated humanely in wartime. This is according to the UN Charter. Murder, torture, hostage taking, and humiliating and degrading treatment are prohibited. Other agreements ban certain types of weapons, such as chemical or biological munitions. The UN Commission concludes that war crimes have been committed in Ukraine by Russia, and they express great concern over the suffering of civilians in this continuing war. But that's sort of like, okay, so what's happening as a result of that? So I think
her fear was that once a country has it, it's just who monitors it if something really upsets you. And I found this when I thought I was finished with all the research. I found this little thing from the A-bomb to the AI bomb, nuclear weapons problematic evolution. From autonomous nuclear submarines to algorithms detecting a threat to robot-guided high-speed missiles, artificial intelligence could revolutionize nuclear weapons, risking some profound ethical conundrums, a recent report reveals. So now that we have AI, we can just kind of remove ourselves from the decision. So instead of a president, you feed it into AI, and AI says, I think the A-bomb is justified, or no, you can't do that. So that was my research, and now I'm happy to not answer any questions because I don't know. But that's what I know about. I think she was a very brave woman, having 7 children and taking an extremely active role in philosophy and translating Wittgenstein and giving her opinion on things.
When was that written?
This one, 2019. And then I researched what would be the best way for Anscombe dummies to try to understand her. But for example, I can pass this around. Poisoning, so here's representing the action of the man at the pump. So there are all these squares. Moving my arm up and down, pumping, filling the house water supply, poisoning the inhabitants, killing the Nazis, getting better leaders into power. There's one way of looking at it. There's another way of looking at it, and the boxes are sort of in different places.
And what year was Anscombe's book written?
Her intention was 56 or 57. It was pretty soon after she protested against, and maybe she won 57, yeah. And Anscombe, I guess there was a famous group of 4 women who attended Oxford. So also a time when a lot of guys, part of her stay as a student was during a time when there were very few men there because they were in the war. And she, Iris Murdoch, and 2 other women that were very famous British women that I did not know were, these were the fearsome foursome. And they were quite vocal in their opinions on philosophy and literature. Yeah, Austin.
Are we in question mode?
We are definitely in question mode.
I want to say that my limited knowledge, I thought was totally justified about these bombs, maybe the second one, not too much. But that was like a pop gun compared to the modern hydrogen bombs. And the fact that at the last Republican debate, the Trump said, well, we need more nuclear subs to bring China to threaten that if they invade, we're gonna nuke them if they Taiwan, they go to Taiwan. I mean, because we're actually considering unleashing thermonuclear disaster. A leading politician who might be president, which struck me is completely comparing this to, let's say, that was like a pop gun compared to what was really might in the planet, and well, most of us. So to me, this is almost irrelevant. Plus, we didn't know what we had then. What was going to lead to doesn't really apply today. Not a beach.
And I don't think we knew. I like to think it's less horrible because did we know what the after effects of radiation would be for the population of both cities for decades? I mean, Austin and I went to Japan just this last month. We love Japan. We went to Japan the first time, I think 10 years ago, on a tour. There was a lady on our tour that refused to go to Hiroshima. It was an extension. It was offered as an addition to the Kyoto tour. And she refused to go because she said, oh, I heard they still have radiation there. And they don't, but they did for a long time. And they're monitoring it very carefully. And how could we have known the continuing human damage it would do? Did we know at the time people put on those glasses? And
well, of course we didn't, because we were doing it to our own citizens when we were testing.
Right. People were, you better wear these glasses, right? That'll protect you totally from. Weren't people very, very close to in New Mexico when the where was it, Alamogordo? Yeah, where the bomb was going off.
I'm not sure I would assume that the government wouldn't do it to the wrong citizens.
Yes, right. Don't make that assumption. Well, yes.
So I couldn't agree more that the bombing of women, men, and children is horrible, really. So then I would ask you the question, what's the solution? So let's take Hamas. They run over into my country, kill my kids at this musical time. And then they run back and they hide amongst the people. So what's your solution?
Oh, I looked at my phone this morning and one of the headings was, the Israelis have discovered 800 tunnels.
So what's your solution?
To me, if we gave the UN or the Hague or somebody the ability to come in as an completely impartial, trusted outside source, how's that going to happen?
What you just said, right?
I think it's not going to happen.
So what's the solution?
I don't know. Other than I don't think there is one. And so where do we, but now how many countries have the atomic bomb? I didn't find out the answer to that. 6 or 7. And as Austin was pointing out, probably way more powerful than they were when we dropped them. Are. At one point, Anscombe, how many? 8. 8, if you count Israel. Tony.
Do you ever look at Harry Truman when he was in office 4 months and had to live in the country on the shore?
Mm-hmm.
And, historically, he truly, I don't believe was qualified at that point in time to be leading our nation. I'm wondering, and I don't like to go what if, but I mean, let's say Roosevelt died, after this decision was made. How did he look at it? How would he look at this? That was not, he was part of the planning. So, was he gonna use it as a trick? Was he gonna use it as reality? I can't guess, but Harry Truman, at that point in time, he didn't really know what he was doing. I believe. He didn't know the magnitude of the job and the consequences of it.
I just feel that having tried to understand her book and intention, it may be reconsider, after 9/11, talk about an invasion, going into New York City and Washington and blowing up buildings, and that we didn't nuke somebody was astounding. Because we could talk about feeling invaded. It's amazing to me that we haven't used it again, and that nobody has. It's sort of astounding, but we have it now. Has there been any real concerted attempt to get rid of everybody agreeing to take all the atomic bombs to some landfill? I don't think we can do that. Can you disassemble them?
I don't think that's even possible given science, because once created, it's very hard to reverse that process.
Well, what is his name? The guy who left, Bill. He said that he got out of bomb making and into a different field because he didn't like the knowing that now everything is on the internet and anybody can, it's public knowledge. So basically you can teach people how to create these bombs that are pretty powerful. So, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say that if you think about it, Trump was talking about bombing Mexico. I don't know that he was talking about nuclear bombs, but he's talking about bombing Mexico. I don't think they're a superpower, or I don't think they have the bomb, but it's crazy because once you open the door to something, then that's the next step, whether you go there or not. And the other thing is, I just wanted to comment again on the fact that this woman was writing this stuff. I mean, women were not listened to that much.
No.
They stayed at home and took care of the kids.
Oh,
I mean, that's really impressive.
Thank you, Mary. I have another, and it was on the BBC podcast. So these women with these beautiful accents are talking about Elizabeth Anscombe did this and did this. And one thing that she also did, and you saw how she looks, she she loved wearing trousers. And she went to a fancy restaurant with some Oxford friends. And the host or hostess said, "You'll need to wear a skirt or dress, ma'am." And she said, "Oh, all right." And she took off her trousers. She went in, I don't know if it was a long skirt, but she went in without her trousers. So like, all right, you go, girl. So she was a controversial woman, but you're right. It's astounding to me. Yeah. I was surprised that, pretty much nobody has heard of her. She's just kind of an amazing person. But because of Oppenheimer bringing back this time period in the public eye, she's being looked at again, which I think is good. I also think it's too bad that our marketers and people who use the internet are putting together these memes that are they're funny, but they're horrible. Barbie in her pink dress talking with Oppenheimer with flames coming out of his suit. I mean, it's so inconsiderate. Yeah.
Oppenheimer has not been released in Japan, isn't that right?
It still has not been released in Japan. They're hoping that in another couple of years that they will show it. Yeah, but I don't know. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So the timeliness is fairly good, and it wasn't planned. Next week, we have Dr. Rick Hefner, who will be speaking about artificial intelligence, which is apparently the area in which he actually works. So we'll be able to learn a lot, I'm sure, from him. So next week, we'll see you. Thanks for coming.